So far this 1090, my study has been about character and who a person is really.
We, as humans, tend to loop people into groups by their pants, shoes, shirts, appearance, or by the music they listen to, the books they read, if they read.
We've been doing this for a long time, and it can be as innocent or as sinister as you can imagine. But that's not really what we're looking at. What I've been focusing on primarily is consequences of whatever God you choose to follow. I'm using God here in the leadership context. Everybody's got a God. Something they choose to base principle on, something they choose to follow, something they choose to make sacrifices to.
Some people choose to give their time to chase money, or people. Some give it to friends, family, food, themselves, whatever it is.
Now you should give time for all of those things. It's just that some people choose those as the chief of their life instead of God. But to want good character, you have to know the consequences of bad. Before we really dive into this, it should be noted that just because somebody does not or chooses not to follow God, it does not make them a bad person. Not every unbeliever is going to fit in the subjects we talk about today. Actually, I imagine most of them won't. And you should not take my word as God's. This is based on observation and opinion, not truth and fact. Okay.
I'm going to talk a lot about greed, as it does like to rear its ugly little head everywhere. I believe greed to be the highest form of selfishness. You become blinded by the comfort of now, you take your eyes off all around you, and even yourself.
It corrupts your spirit, shatters who you are, destroys relationships, takes your peace, and only leads you to death. If you've ingested any kind of media as a child, you know that greed is bad.
In 1 Sam, we meet this fella from the tribe of Benjamin, named Saul. Saul was tall, dark, and handsome. He was smart, strong, brave, honestly, a really cool guy.
He was called to be king of the tribes of Judah for a temporary amount of time, and he was awesome.
Saul was an awesome warrior, killing thousands of enemies, protecting and serving his people well. A true champion of the people, and pretty popular amongst the ladies. Saul was God's anointed, and Saul loved God.
But when his time to step away from the throne came, God's anointing left him, because he decided that he loved power more.
When his replacement came, Saul threw spears and slung arrows at his people, the ones who loved him. He had become a danger to those he protected.
Taking their lives as forfeit, trying to kill the very man that he should have celebrated. Saul instigated betrayal and division in his own household just by chasing David. He led his men and himself into an unnecessary battle where he lost his life. Let's talk about Judas of Iscariot. Yes, the man who literally sold out Jesus. But let's just take a moment and imagine Judas as more than just some money-grubbing, greedy miser, but as somebody who loved Jesus and actually saw him as a friend and mentor.
Somebody who loved the 12 friends he's been traveling all across the desert with. Here's a piece that people love to leave out of the Last Supper. Before Judas takes the dip, Jesus says that whoever would betray him, that man's life would have been better served unborn. Then proceeds to give Judas permission to betray him. Go and do what you must do, he said.
Think of what's running through Judas's mind. The man of grace, of love, of forgiveness, of peace just told me that my life would have been better had I never existed.
If Judas really loved Jesus and the 11 others, I'm sure he knew better than anyone else. He was cowardly and selfish. He knew that even if he had all the money in the world, his life would always be deemed worthless.
Judas took his own life. He was around the right people. It's safe to say he did the right thing when people were watching, whether it was to save face or maybe it was the only time he was brave enough to do it. It does take a certain boldness to follow Jesus. Judas was just a scorpion amongst frogs.
Watching the water rush around him, knowing he had killed himself and his only path to life. Judas set his own trap, despite being surrounded by good company.
He didn't have a Paul. Everybody needs a Paul. When Peter started straying, he had a Paul.
Peter started avoiding the Gentiles, and Paul had to call him back to earth. And much like the Walmart spank, it was held in front of God and everyone else. Good friends are hard to come by, but you should get some, because their connections become your connections. Like Daniel. You know that lesson where a teacher offers you one piece of candy now, or 3 pieces of candy later? Daniel was the kid who charmed his teacher to get all 4. Everyone just loved him. Daniel, with what reads like little effort, convinces the person in charge of all palace trainees to let him and his friends fast instead of eat the food prepared for them. If I was Shadrach, Meshach, or Abednego, I would have been mad. The king had prepared the best food for these guys, fancy meats, cheeses, wines, like real rich people food. But instead, they were going to eat vegetables and drink water. Yay. And because of that, the 4 of them were of sharper wit, looked better, and were just generally healthier than all the other palace trainees. But later, when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the boys, refused to bow to the idol of the king and were thrown into the furnace, God's favor saved them. The furnace was heated to 7 times as hot as it normally is, and it killed the men who threw them in there. But Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah came out unscathed. The book of Daniel says the ropes used to bind them burned, but their skin, hair, and clothes were untouched. They didn't even smell like fire.
So Christians, I encourage you to check those around you. Who or what do they love? What influences them? But first, check yourself. Who do you love? What's really influencing you? Is it building or corrupting your character? You can't surround yourself with only Christians because that's where religion hides, the holier than thou or I'm better than that guy kind of attitude. But you gotta make sure that those who don't follow God don't take you away, even if it's unintentional. We're called to grow the kingdom, not to leave it. Thanks for watching.